a lot of devices to manage. I've tried to make sure that everything is fine, everything is charging, everything goes well. But if any disasters happen, please let me know about it and I can try to mitigate them to the best of my abilities. Um, am I live? I think I'm live. Can everyone see me? Should be live. Hold on, let me start recording for our members. You can see. Okay, perfect. Kalyan says now I'm live. Great.
Recording in progress.
Great. So, the last time we had read up till page number 176. I also apologize for the last live stream because I know midway we stopped streaming because my laptop ran out of battery and there were like 1,000 devices charging. So, I believe the last time we had started off at page number 164 of the book. Sorry. Am I not live? Can you not hear me? Will you guys just please give me a minute? Just 1 second.
Recording in progress.
Alright. Huh, it's good, right? It's all fine. Okay, so the last time we had read page number 164 to 176, and I'll give you guys the gist. It was basically to the theme of that chunk of the book was basically how patriots, how Indian patriots at the time were treated by the Indian community. So it was the British, of course, were extremely, oppressive and adopted very draconian measures to suppress any kind of dissent against the British Empire. But what was really surprising and gut-wrenching was actually the treatment of these revolutionaries by the Indians themselves. So you have Baba Rao, Vinayak Savarkar's brother, who was arrested for assisting in the underground war, and of course aiding Vinayak from overseas because he was back in India and Vinayak was in India house. And he was sentenced to transportation for life, where he had to endure very very unfortunate circumstances and like very very severe conditions. And then he was eventually sent to Kalapani. And we haven't more on that. I think we're going to read more on that later. So far that's all that has happened. And the second revolutionary that Sampath talks about in these pages is Madan Lal Dhingra, who assassinated Curzon Wiley. Right? So his treatment by, well, of course the British, because he killed one of the, he killed an Englishman, he assassinated an Englishman. But more importantly, his treatment by his own family, how his family basically disowned him. His brother approached Curzon Wiley and apologized for Dhingra's behavior. And right to the very end, we see that Dhingra did not, even for a second, he wasn't apologetic about what he did. He compared his actions to what any Englishman would have done if a German were to occupy, Britain, and whether or not, and he basically appealed to the English public to see reason from his point of view, and he basically said that if an Englishman were to attack a German, should a German be occupying England, would such an action be justified? Would such an assassination be justified? And because of this, because of his reason and because of, I suppose, the way he presented it, and of course Savarkar helped too in publishing his statements and works, he was able to garner a little bit of sympathy from at least that chunk of the British press that was sympathetic with the Irish revolutionaries. So, but what was really heartbreaking was how Indians treated him and how Indian patriots and politicians treated him. And that was basically the theme of what we read, and that formed a chunk of the discussion that we were having last time. Okay, we begin from page number 176. We'd left it bang in the middle, and I'm going to Just for a little bit of context, I'm going to pick it up from page number 175 and read from the middle of the page so that you get an idea of what I mean. What kind of things were being published about Dhingra at the time. This is an extract of The Indian Sociologist by Arthur Fletcher Horsley. I mean, this particular article on Dhingra has been written by Arthur Fletcher Horsley. Alright, does everyone have the page number? 175? Okay. So, Sampath writes, for publishing Shyamji's views supporting Dhingra in the July edition of the Indian Sociologist, the printer of the journal, Arthur Fletcher Horsley, was tried for sedition on the same day as Dhingra. Chief Justice Lord Alverston decreed that anyone writing or printing such seditious material in the future would be liable for prosecution. On 23rd July, Horsley was also sentenced to 4 months' imprisonment. Being a staunch advocate of free press, 22-year-old Guy Aldred, a publisher and an avowed anarchist and supporter of revolutionaries, decided to defy this diktat. He published a long, bitter article attacking British imperialism and praised Dhingra and the other Indian revolutionaries in the August 1909 edition of the Indian Sociologist in his own name. Among other things, he wrote, and this is what Guy Aldred writes. My apologies, it wasn't, the printer of the journal was Arthur Horsley. The writer of this particular article was Guy Aldred. Guy Aldred writes, in the execution of Dhingra, that cloak will be publicly worn, that secret language spoken, that solemn veil employed to conceal the sword of imperialism, by which we are sacrificed to the insatiable idol of modern despotism, whose ministers are Cromer, Curzon, and Morley and Company. Murder, which they would represent to us a horrible crime when the murdered is a government flunky, we see practiced by them without repugnance or remorse when the murdered is a working man, a nationalist patriot, an Egyptian fellahin, or a half-starved victim of despotic society's bloodlust. Why then should Dhingra be executed? Because he is not a time-serving executioner, but a nationalist patriot, who, though his ideals are not their ideals, is worthy of the admiration of those workers at home who have as little to gain from the lick-spittle crew of imperialistic blood-sucking capitalist parasites as what the nationalists have in India. On 25th August 1909, Guy was picked up from his house at 35 Stanlake Road, Shepherd's Bush. The police confiscated 369 copies of the August edition of the Indian Sociologist. Guy admitted to printing 1,500 copies, of which 1,000 had been sent to Shyamji in Paris. The police also seized copies of correspondences between Shyamji and Guy. In a letter dated 28th July, Shyamji had commended Guy for displaying rare courage of conviction and that he did not fear risk one bit by undertaking to print the Indian Sociologist even after Horsley's arrest. There was also a letter from Shyamji dated 10th August requesting Guy to ensure that the paper comes out at least a day or two before the fateful date of Dhingra's execution, so that the martyr should see in print what Shyamji had said about him. Guy's press itself was called Bakunin Press after the well-known Russian revolutionary. Guy was tried on 7th September at the Sessions Court, and on 10th September, Justice Coleridge pronounced him guilty. He was convicted for resisting the laws in force in the British Indian Empire, raising discontent in the minds of native Indians against the king, and promoting the use of physical force, violence, and disorder. He was sentenced to 12 months of rigorous imprisonment. The police under Francis Powell, Detective Inspector of the Metropolitan Police, New Scotland Yard, also traced one James Tochati, who lived in Hammersmith in London. Tochati was accused as Guy's associate and who had in his possession copies of the seditious Indian Sociologist. It was also revealed that Tochati was preparing to publish the September edition of the magazine, and the Type 2 had been set for the same. Frank Cates and 5 other men were assisting him in the process. The court ordered the rounding up of all the men involved. Thus, along with the Indian revolutionaries, several British and Irishmen who supported the cause of Indian liberation and stood by the Indians also faced the brutal consequences of the law. The Dhingra episode echoed across various parts of the world for a long time. The newspaper Vande Mataram that Aurobindo Ghosh and others were bringing out in Calcutta was suppressed after the Alipore bomb case. This was revived as the Vande Mataram, a monthly organ of Indian independence by Madam Bikaji Kama and Lala Hardayal. The Indian revolutionaries in Paris had also started the Paris India Society. The very first issue of the Vande Mataram, that was published in Geneva on 10 September 1909, was dedicated to Dhingra and his memory. In a tribute titled Dhingra the Immortal, it said, "Young India has produced another hero whose words and deeds shall be cherished by the whole world for centuries to come. Dhingra's declaration will be treasured in the archives of national and universal history as a precious heirloom for future generations. Dhingra has behaved at each stage of his trial like a hero of ancient times. He has reminded us of the history of medieval Rajputs and Sikhs who loved death like a bride. England thinks she has killed Dhingra. In reality, he lives forever and has given the death blow to British sovereignty in India. Life immortal is his. Who can take it away from him? All nations have watched Dhingra's trial with bated breath and have felt that New India is unconquerable because she can give birth to such heroic sons. The Indian Patriotic Party, which has declared war of the knife with England, has issued a manifesto, in the course of which it says, Dhingra has found the secret of life. He has discovered the path of immortality. He has realized the highest destiny of man. He has lifted himself above the common run of men and joined the company of the saints and heroes. These words sum up the attitude of India towards our patriot martyr. In time to come, when the British Empire in India shall have been reduced to ashes, Dhingra's monument will adorn the squares of our chief towns, recalling the memory of our children, the noble life and the nobler death of him, who laid down his life in a far-off land for the cause he loved so well. The inaugural issue of Talwar, started by Virendranath Chattopadhyay from Paris in November 1909, also paid rich tributes to Dhingra. But even though there was overwhelming support and appreciation for Dhingra in the months following his execution, there was an equal amount of condemnation of his act by several elements of the political spectrum. Leaders of the moderate wing of the Indian National Congress, quite like the eminent members of the Indian Community of London, were deeply critical of Dhingra's act. They believed that it decelerated the pace and tenure of the negotiations they had been having with the British for greater autonomy. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was stinging in his criticism of Dhingra. He wrote, "It is being said that in defense of Sir Curzon Wylie's assassination, that it is the British who are responsible for India's ruin, and that just as the British would kill every German if Germany invaded Britain, so too it is the right of any Indian to kill any Englishman. Every Indian should reflect thoroughly on this murder. It has done India much harm." The deputation's efforts have also received a setback, but that need not be taken into consideration. It is the ultimate result that we must think of. Mr. Dhingra's defense is inadmissible. In my view, he has acted like a coward. All the same, one can only pity the man. He was egged on to do this by ill-digested reading of worthless writings. His defense of himself, too, appears to have been learnt by rote. It is those who incited him to this that deserve to be punished. In my view, Mr. Dhingra himself is innocent. The murder was committed in a state of intoxication. It is not merely wine or bhang that makes one drunk. A mad idea can also do so. That was the case with Mr. Dhingra. The analogy of Germans and Englishmen is fallacious. If the Germans were to invade Britain, the British would kill only the invaders. They would not kill every German whom they met. Moreover, they would not kill an unsuspecting German or Germans who are guests. If I kill someone in my own house without a warning, someone who has done me no harm, I cannot but be called a coward. There is an ancient custom among the Arabs that they would not kill anyone in their own house, even if the person be their enemy. They would kill him after he had left the house and after he had been given time to arm himself. Those who believe in violence would be brave men if they observe these rules when killing anyone. Otherwise, they must be looked upon as cowards. It may be said that what Dhingra did, publicly, and knowing full well that he himself would have to die, argues courage of no mean order on his part. But as I have said above, men can do these things in a state of intoxication, and can also banish the fear of death. Whatever courage there is in this is the result of intoxication, not a quality of the man himself. A man's own courage consists in suffering deeply and over a long period. That alone is a brave act, which is preceded by careful reflection. I must say that those who believe and argue that such murders may do good to India are ignorant men indeed. No act of treachery can ever profit a nation. Even should the British leave in consequence of such murderous acts, who will rule in their place? The only answer is the murderers. Who will then be happy? Is the Englishman bad because he is an Englishman? Is it that everyone with an Indian skin is good? Incriminating words by Gandhi. Anyway, despite the criticism of the revolutionary methods, it was no mere coincidence that on 15th November 1909, the government introduced the Indian Councils Act, popularly known as the Morley-Minto Reforms. It was way back in 1906 that Viceroy Lord Minto had prepared a minute arguing for greater say of Indians in governance, given their rising education levels and awareness. Yet, till the revolutionary movement caught steam and a spate of bombings and political assassinations shook both India and Britain, there was little progress on the reforms. Finally, the Act legitimized the election of Indians to various legislative councils across India for the first time. The reforms also granted the request of Muslim groups that had come together under the umbrella of the Muslim League, formed in 1906, demanding separate electorates for their community. This remained a bone of contention for a long time, till it spelled its ultimate disaster on the subcontinent. In fact, Gandhi too acknowledged the reason for the rapid implementation of these administrative reforms. When asked in an interview if the Secretary of State Lord Morley's reforms were driven by the fear of the revolutionaries, Gandhi candidly admitted that the English are both a timid and a brave nation. England is, I believe, easily influenced by the use of gunpowder. It is possible that Lord Morley has granted the reforms through fear, but what is granted under fear can be retained only so long as the fear lasts. The questioner was confused with a self-contradiction in the reply and pointed that out. The questioner says, "Will you not admit that you are arguing against yourself? You know that what the English obtained in their own country, they obtained by using brute force. I know you have argued that what they have obtained is useless, but that does not affect my argument. They wanted useless things and they got them. My point is that their desire was fulfilled. What does it matter what means they adopted? Why should we not obtain our goal, which is good, by any means whatsoever, even by using violence? Shall I think of the means when I have to deal with a thief in the house? My duty is to drive him out anyhow. You seem to admit that we have received nothing, and that we shall receive nothing by petitioning. Why then may we not do so by using brute force? And to retain what we may receive, we shall keep up the fear by using the same force to the extent that it may be necessary. You will not find fault with the continuance of force to prevent a child from thrusting its foot into fire. Somehow or other, we have to gain our end." In response, he was given an extremely long winding he was given an extremely long winding series of justifications, theological and philosophical constructs that largely contradicted each other, forcing him to move on to another question. Exactly 3 years after their first meeting in October 1906, Gandhi met Vinayak again on 24th October 1909. The Indian community gathered to celebrate the festival of Vijayadashmi, the 10th day following the 9-day festivities and fasting of Navratri. To avoid British surveillance, Englishmen were also invited. Nearly 70 Indians participated. Gandhi was invited to preside over the meeting. He agreed on the condition that no controversial politics were to be touched upon, and that he would rather speak on the greatness of the Ramayana. He was dressed in a swallow-tailed coat and stiff front shirt. In his address, Gandhi mentioned that the occasion of Vijayadashmi, that marked the victory of Lord Sri Ramachandra, was a momentous one, and that he needed to be honored by every Indian as a historical personage. Gandhi went on. Everyone, whether Hindu, Muslim, or Parsi, should be proud of belonging to a country which produced a man like Sri Ramachandra. To the extent that he was a great Indian, he should be honored by every Indian. For the Hindus, he is a god. If India again produced a Ramachandra, a Sita, a Lakshman, and a Bharat, she would attain prosperity in no time. It would be remembered, of course, that before Ramachandra qualified for public service, he suffered exile in the forest for 12 years. Sita went through extreme suffering, and Lakshman lived without sleep all those years and observed celibacy. When Indians learn to live in that manner, they can, from that instant, count themselves as free men. India has no other way of achieving happiness for herself. Okay. It was then Vinayak's turn to speak. Indirectly puncturing holes in Gandhi's arguments, he said that it would be worthwhile to remember that Vijayadashmi is preceded by a 9-day fast to propitiate goddess Durga, who is a symbol of war and annihilation of evil. Sorry. He concurred with Gandhi that Ramachandra was the life and soul of India, but urged the audience to remember that even he could not establish Ramrajya, his kingdom, without slaying Ravan, who symbolized tyranny, aggression, and injustice. If Ramchandra had merely sat on a fast, wow, he's really going for Gandhi here. If Ramchandra had merely sat on a fast, it was unlikely that his kingdom could have been established. He went on. Hindus are the heart of Hindustan. Nevertheless, just as the beauty of the rainbow is not impaired but enhanced by its varied hues, so also Hindustan will look all the more beautiful across the sky of future by assimilating all the best from the Muslim, Parsi, Jewish, and other civilizations. Vinayak's stirring speech won him many accolades from the audience. Barrister Asaf Ali, who was present at the event, described Vinayak being as fragile as an anemic girl, restless as a mountain torrent, and keen as the edge of a torpedo blade. He later wrote that it was not an exaggeration to say that Vinayak was one of the few really effective speakers I have known and heard, and there's hardly an orator of the first rank, either here or in England, whom I have not had the privilege of hearing. The clash between the ideologies of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi and Vinayak Damodar Savarkar had only just begun. I'm just gonna quickly go through your comments. Hindi saying लातों के भूत बातों से नहीं मानते is what happened here. Mahatma sounds bitter in accepting that Dheera succeeded in implanting fear in British. Savarkar is basically saying, Chicha control karo. Yeah, I suppose he is. Huh? No, and he's done a good job of very subtly countering Gandhi's speech. Alright, we read on for another 5-10 minutes and then we discuss what we've read. Okay. As a consequence of the Dhingra episode and Curzon Wiley's murder, the attitude of the British government towards Indian students in London became harsher. It was a deeply embarrassing incident for Scotland Yard and the British intelligence community. People wondered how Dhingra managed to take rifle shooting lessons for months with no detective ever being able to trace it. After the assassination, the letters exchanged between Morley and Minto conveyed their frustration and their disappointment, especially with Sir Edward Henry, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. I much fear, Morley wrote, that Henry has no real grasp of a situation that has caught him entirely by surprise. On the whole, the police frame of mind strikes me as extremely casual, either making needless fuss or else not making serious fuss enough. Scotland Yard's response to the crisis was to put Morley and Lord Curzon under protective surveillance. Within 3 weeks of the assassination, Morley had his own personal retinue of 3 special branch detectives follow him to and from work at the India office. These additional agents and increased surveillance were cosmetic changes that were deemed inadequate by the British government, press, and public alike. In the aftermath of Curzon Wiley's assassination, the British government ordered a closure of India House, as it was seen as the nerve centre of revolutionary activity. In the last meeting held at the House on 4th July 1909, before it was shut down, Vinayak made a speech eulogizing Dhingra's bravery. In a reference to Harish Chandra Krishna Rao Koregaonkar, who had shadowed Dhingra during the assassination, Vinayak said, "There was one man to watch and guide the whole thing, and he says that Dhingra stood cool and calm, firing at the prostrate figure of his country's enemy, Wiley." On 21st July 1909, a farewell meeting was held at an Indian restaurant at number 17 Red Lion Passage, Holborn, that was attended by all the India House inmates. They had gathered to wish Koregaonkar well, as he was on his way back to India, and to thank him for his contributions. Vinayak and others personally saw him off at Victoria Station. The British were conscious that with the closure of India House, and in view of heightened police surveillance, a flight of the revolutionaries abroad was imminent. Most revolutionaries would now find safer havens in other European cities, especially Paris. In October 1909, Sajni Ranjan Banerjee of Sukhsagar Dutt was employed specifically for the purposes of a 24-hour surveillance on Indian students who seemed suspicious. He was to act as a conduit between the DCI in India and Scotland Yard in London. It was decided to create an Indian Secret Service to facilitate easy communication and sharing of information between these two organizations spread across continents. John Arnold Wallinger, who was to head this new Secret Service, began coordinating operations between the DCI, Scotland Yard, and also the Paris police force. Wallinger had earlier served as the superintendent of the Bombay police and had an excellent grasp over several Indian languages. This appointment and the decision to work in coordination with Paris were to prove fortuitous when it came to Vinayak in the following year. With India House closing down, Vinayak moved to Bipin Chandra Pal's house. But after the Dhingra episode, Pal suddenly shifted his priorities to side with the moderates in their denunciation of Dhingra. This made Vinayak's stay at his house untenable. He was chased from lodge to lodge, sometimes 2 in the course of a single day, due to police pressure. On one such occasion, where he had already changed 2 lodges and had just checked into the third and was beginning to lie down, the owner asked him to vacate since the detectives seemed to have posted themselves around the place. He was exhausted and was on the verge of physical collapse. At this point, a German lady accepted him as a boarder in a room over a small and extremely dirty Indian restaurant in Red Lion Passage. A police officer noted that this lady was not only a bit of an anarchist herself, but also German. They saw proof of her subversive orientation in the fact that on one instance she had warned Vinayak, who was holding a meeting with fellow Indians in his room, about detectives lurking around. Consequently, one of the Indians was sent outside to distract the agents, and after a second warning, and after a second warning knock, the meeting dispersed in some evident haste and trepidation. Vinayak interestingly shared the room with a certain Sukh Sagar Dutt. It is not clear whether this Dutt was the same British informant or if they were different individuals, though the latter seems more likely. Garnett describes how the windows of the room that Vinayak and Dutt shared looked across the filthy alleys of one of the dirtiest London slums. The room opposite theirs was occupied by a lady with 4 children, and she kept screaming and was frequently drunk. But Vinayak seemed totally at peace and was indifferent to her existence and indeed oblivious to his environment. He was wrapped in visions. And what were these visions? Garnett speculates and writes as follows. India was a volcano which had erupted violently during the mutiny and which could be made to erupt again, and that every act of terrorism and violence would beget further violence and further terrorism until Indians regained their manliness and their mother country her freedom. All the sufferings involved were a fitting sacrifice to her. Vinayak knew that his days in London were numbered. Unfortunately for Vinayak, bad news did not seem to cease. In November 1909, the Viceroy, Lord Minto, was on a tour of the princely states of Gujarat and was to visit Ahmedabad. The British feared that Abhinav Bharat members might cause disturbances and hence heightened the security in and around Viceroy's travel route. Brahmagiri Bua of the Pune branch of Abhinav Bharat was indeed planning to throw bombs at the Viceroy's cavalcade, and they were in regular touch with Ganganath Bharatiya Vidyalaya in Baroda. Despite the tight security, the revolutionaries managed to hurl a bomb at the Viceroy's procession, although he managed to escape unhurt. The accused, Mohanlal Pandya, was a close associate of Barin Ghosh and Narayan Rao Savarkar. Consequently, Vinayak's 17-year-old brother was also arrested on suspicion of involvement in the crime. It was later, on the evidence of his high school headmaster, that Narayan Rao was in Pune on the day of the explosion that he was released after a few days. His arrest shattered Yeshu Vahini, who was already suffering the consequence of Baba Rao's transportation to the Andamans. She wrote a heart-wrenching letter to Vinayak, who was her best friend and confidant, conveying her utter despair and grief at these developments. The poet and Vinayak burst forth. The year 1909 had been particularly harsh. Little did he know that the years following it would only be worse. He wrote a deeply moving poem to Yeshu, titled Santvana, or Consolation. The rough translation of the Marathi poem is as follows. My loving salutations to thee, O my sister, whose love hath so tenderly nursed me as to make me forget the early loss of my mother. Received your letter of blessing, have taken to heart what you hath written. Thy letter gladdened my heart and made me feel truly blessed. Blessed indeed is this family of ours, inasmuch as it is thus privileged to serve Lord Ram and administer to his will. Many a flower blooms and withers away. Who has kept their count or note? But behold the lotus flower that was plucked by Gajendra's trunk and offered at the feet of Sri Hari and thus withered away there, became immortal and holy, effecting moksha. Thus is our mother Bharat like the pious Gajendra, seeking deliverance. Let her come to our garden and offer our dark blue black lotus flower, and pluck it from the bough to offer it at the feet of Sri Rama. Blessed indeed is our family tree, definitely touched by the divine, inasmuch as it is privileged to serve Sri Rama. Let then the rest of our flowers too be plucked and offered at the feet of Sri Rama. Let this mortal body be put to good use. Immortal is the family tree that has extinguished itself for the nation. Its fragrance of human welfare spreads all around. O Mother, weave a garland of all in bloom for the festival of the 9 nights. Once the momentous ninth night passes, and the 9th garland is woven and offered, Kali the Terrible, will reveal herself and grant victory to her votaries. Sister, thou hast ever been the symbol of courage, the source of my inspiration. Thou too art a consecrated and avowed votary to Ram's noble mission. Thy consecration to this great and noble cause calls upon thee to be great and noble thyself. Behold, on one side stand watching the past souls of sages and saints, of our race gone before, and on the other side, the future generations yet unborn. May we be able to acquit ourselves today in a manner as to evoke universal approval from these godly spectators. Physically and emotionally exhausted and broken, Vinayak left London for Brighton, a seaside town. On the evening of 10th December 1909, he was sitting by the Brighton beach with his friend Niranjan Pal, Bipin Chandra Pal's son. All around him, happy families, parents, and their children were enjoying the lovely weather, the sea, surf, and sand. Vinayak was overwhelmed with intense pathos and longing for his motherland. Everything suddenly seemed to have shattered. His professional and personal lives were in tatters. But more importantly, he felt that he had been a colossal failure in the sacred mission, armed struggle to liberate his motherland, and that he had set out upon. Dhingra's execution, the public ostracism and shaming that followed, and constantly being on the run, were taking their toll on Vinayak. Niranjan Pal described that poignant moment. Sorry. Ooh. Presently, he commenced to hum a song. He sang as he composed. It was a Marathi song describing the pitiable serfdom of India. Forgetful of all else, Savarkar went on singing. Presently, tears began to roll down his cheeks. His voice became choked. He sobbed, but he still sang. The song remained unfinished. He burst and began to weep like a child. This catharsis manifested itself in the form of that immortal melody that has haunted the innumerable people ever since. Please pardon my butchering of the pronunciations, but the title of the song goes, Ne Majasi ne Parat, Matra Bhumila Sagara, Prana Talamalala. The classic poem and its translation are as follows. I'll read the translation. O ocean, take me back to my motherland. My soul in so much torment be. Lapping worshipfully at my mother's feet, so always I saw you. Let us visit other lands to see. The abounding nature said you. Seeing my mother's heart full of poems, a sacred oath you did give to her. Knowing the way home upon your back, my speedy return you promised her. Fell for your promise did I, that worldly wise and able be I. Her deliverance better served do I, upon returning, so saying I left her. O ocean, my soul in so much torment be. Like a parrot in a cage, like a deer in a trap, oh so duped am I. Parting from my mother forever, besieged by darkness am I. Flowers of virtue gather did I, that blessed by their fragrance she be. Bereft from service for her deliverance, my learning a futile burden it be, the love of her mango trees. The beauty of her blossoming vines, her tender budding rose, oh forever lost is her garden to me. O ocean, my soul in so much torment be. Stars abound in the heavens above, but only the star of Bharat land love I. Here are found plush palaces, but only my mother's humble heart love I. What care I for a kingdom without her? Ever exile in her forests choose I. Deception is futile now, say I. Let you not be spared, bow I. Suffer the same pangs, cry I, of parting with the dearest of your rivers. O ocean, my soul in so much torment be. O ye of forming surf,
Pitilessly you mock. Why go back on your word? Why deceive my helpless mother? Or why condemn me to exile so? Was it in fear of England, who flaunts her mastery over you so? Fearsome though England may be, oh, my mother is not feeble so. Tell all about sage Agastya she will, who in one gulp your waters drank. O ocean, my soul in so much torment be. The poem is one of the masterpieces of modern Marathi literature. Later, it was set to music by musician and composer Hriday Nath Mangeshkar, Vinayak's close associate, and rendered in the melodious voices of singers Lata Mangeshkar, Asha Bhosle, Meena Mangeshkar, and Hriday Nath Mangeshkar. The song tugs at one's heartstrings. It fails to leave anyone who hears it unmoved. The emotional trauma and strain that Vinayak suffered manifested itself as physical illness. Around December 1909, Vinayak went down with pneumonia and acute bronchitis. The condition worsened to the extent that he was advised to move to a sanatorium in Wales and was put under the care of an Indian doctor, C. Muthu. The cost of treatment was borne by Shyamji. But even as he was beginning to convalesce, there was more stormy news from back home coming his way. And that's the end of chapter 5.
Oh, it's hard to read. Alright, let's look at your chats. Mahatma strikes again. Mahatma OP in the chat. Okay. We are taught that revolutionaries didn't make much of an impression in freedom struggle. India House in England is proof that is false also. Digna episode and the Morley Minto reforms shattered the myth that when Indians are slapped on one cheek, we turn our other cheek. Savarkars were really blowing the roof off, quite literally. This song is available on YouTube. I'll actually listen to it. That was the first thought as I was reading about it. That was the first thought that occurred to me, that I would really like to listen to it in its original Marathi lyrics. Because I guess the beauty of the literature and the composition is taken away when you're reading it in English. Although it is still beautiful in English, and I can sense the gist of it and what he's trying to say and how sad he must be. And really, I think what I'm getting from this book, and of course some of the members have already read this book and are rereading it, but what I understood from their reading experience of this book as well is that Savarkar at the end of the day was a poet. He wasn't a violent man as such. And I'm not seeing, again, I am a novice who is exploring history. Okay, so this is a reading initiative that we take together. And I'm in no way, I'm not claiming any expertise. So giving that disclaimer and that caveat, I'm still going to say that so far I have not read anything that would incriminate him to such an extent as he is demonized today. And it is still a mystery, even so far into the book, it is still a mystery to me why he is demonized. So I think that perhaps after we read this book, I would like to undertake this exercise of finding out what exactly is the criticism against him. People have called him a coward. Gandhi has called him a coward. So surely that must have been the prevalent narrative at the time. And I would like to know why. What exactly did he do that people think that he is a coward somehow? Why is he seen as the bastion of tyranny, Hindu tyranny particularly? So he was very devoted to the Hindu cause, but I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. As in, why is a person who belongs to a community trying to champion that community? Why is a person being demonized for championing his own community? I don't think that necessarily makes you a bad person. Also, okay, Let's go over what we've read so far, though. I think, contrary to what we continue to read in history, is that Indians were entirely incompetent, and the Britishers took advantage of that incompetence and, won dominion over India. But what we also don't read is the British incompetence and how scared they really were, and how they understood that yes, they were a powerful minority, and they were in they had the technological advantage, of course, but that they were still a minority, and that if the majority were to unite against them, that numerically speaking, it would become impossible for them to govern India. That is, if the entire country were to unite and fight them, which is what Dhingra's assassination was extremely jarring, right, for Morley, and which is why they talk about how Scotland Yard had a few detectives tailing him, but how that was also criticized by the British press and public as not being enough, and just being cosmetic changes, right? You guys also have to read about Gandhi meeting Vinayak. So in this chapter, we've spoken about how the Sampath writes exactly 3 years after their first meeting in October 1906. Gandhi met Vinayak again on October 1909. So the October 1906 meeting is actually hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious, and there's less evidence of it happening, in the sense that we know that they met, but we don't know what exactly they spoke about. And one of the sources that Savarkar mentions, I forget, narrates this conversation between them where Vinayak is cooking fish, or I think boiling prawns or something, and Gandhi walks into the kitchen of India House, and he's basically, he starts talking to Vinayak about politics and business, basically work. And Vinayak says that, listen, before we get into all that, why don't you sit down, have a meal with all of us, get to know us, and then we'll talk shop. And Gandhi sees him boiling prawns, and he is baffled because he's a very strict vegetarian, and he basically refuses. Not only does he refuse to eat a meal with Savarkar, but he also says that Savarkar himself is a Chitpavan Brahmin, and that he should not really be cooking non-vegetarian food. And Savarkar responds saying that here we are, trying to if you cannot eat with us, you can't work with us, right? So if you have a problem just sitting and eating with us because of our caste or whatever other identities, then you can't work with us, and there's really no point of talking shop. And here we are in India trying to raise hell and trying to raise people who are ready to eat the British alive, and you can't even eat boiled fish. So really, this is no place for you. And this is just something I was remembering when I was reading this line, that it's hilarious that so many of us don't know about this. It's a very interesting anecdote. So yeah, and I'll go back to it. I mean, I'll upload that little extract from this book in my Instagram stories if possible. Let me see if I can find it. What else? How incriminating are Gandhi's speeches, though? Do you guys see it? It's crazy, right? I mean, the father of the nation saying that. Hold on, let me take that paragraph out. Oh, the father of the nation saying, if the Britishers leave in consequence of such murderous acts, who will rule in their place? The only answer is the murderers. Who will then be happy? Is the Englishman bad because he is an Englishman? Is it that everyone with an Indian skin is good? This is the father of the nation talking about India. I mean, it's extremely, it's very difficult to understand why he was anointed to this position, given his hundreds and thousands of speeches, which are so anti-India to a great extent. Madan Lal Dhingra, whatever he did for his country. He never had any kind of a personal animosity against Curzon Wyllie, but it was because Curzon Wyllie partitioned Bengal, which led to a lot of violence. It was because of the general policies of the British in India, which were extremely oppressive, extremely draconian, is why he felt that there was really no other way to get the Britishers to change their ways except by sheer violence. And he explains that in his statement that he reads out before the court. He also refuses to recognize that the English courts have any jurisdiction upon him because he believes India to be a free country who is wrongly occupied by the British. And so no court of law could have rightful jurisdiction over an Indian because it is an English court. And that makes a lot of sense to me and to anybody else, I mean, who claims to be a patriot and who's struggling for India's independence. So for somebody like that, if you claim that you belong to such a position, then at the very least you can act like it, right? But Gandhi's words are the exact opposite. He condemns Dhingra for some reason. And he says that Dhingra was a coward, and that if independence is gained by such measures, it's not rightful independence. So I think it's a pipe dream to presume that we'll all just petition the British and that they will just nicely leave. I think that's extremely naive. But the fact that this point of view was sold as the correct one, and the fact that it had so much public traction and support, just seems insane to me, right? I mean, that's nuts. But that's what is taught to us in our history books. Or it could also be, the fact that perhaps it didn't receive as much public support as we're told, because history is written by those in power, right? So perhaps we're looking at, fabricated history, or exaggerated perhaps to some extent. So those have been my observations on the book so far in what we've read. And it's also the life of, his life so far. He hasn't even been to Kala Pani just yet, and I know that part is coming in this book, and I am extremely terrified of how I'm going to read it and how I'm going to get through it. But despite the fact that he hasn't even been sentenced to Kala Pani just yet, his life is already so tumultuous and so disturbing and so filled with so much grief and loss that you wonder how one man could have taken all of this. Especially a man who is as sensitive as he is. He's a poet, he's a songwriter, he's an author at the heart of it. And somebody who feels as much as he does, it must be torture to a great extent. And you also think about how this man had the option to really do anything he pleases. In the previous chapters, I don't know for those of you who've read this book, but in the previous chapters we see that he did really, really well in his academics. He was really loved by all his teachers. Except for political differences, in general, what I mean is he was a very good student, and he always scored well, despite of not originally being from a poor family, but despite of being thrust into poverty because of the plague and because of a number of other circumstances. And he's always done really well. So this guy does not lack options. He can really do anything he wants, and he chooses to use his intelligence and energy and channel it into India's independence struggle, because he believes that to be the supreme goal for all Indians to pursue. And previous chapters will tell you that he wasn't naive about it either, despite of having started Abhinav Bharat at a very young age. He wasn't naive about what the consequences of his actions would be. So he tells his compatriots that, do not be under any delusion. This is going to be a very difficult, long, arduous journey. Be prepared for torture, be prepared for extreme physical exertion, be prepared for things like somebody gouging your eyes out, and like pain and hardship to that extent. Everything that the Britishers can do against you, they will do. And that was the reason that he was so hesitant in taking a wife. But I think because his family had forced him, or that there was some pressure from home, for whatever reason, I'm not sure, he eventually married and had a son or two sons. I'm not sure. I'll have to like refer back to the book. So far, I think his 4-year-old has died because he wasn't vaccinated for smallpox and he caught the smallpox, and he died while Savarkar was in London. So Godse called Savarkar a moderate and a pacifist. Godse was on another level. That's what I'm saying. I'm not seeing an extremist so far. All I'm seeing is a guy who says that the only way to secure independence is through violent means, and by violently usurping the British. Now, that in itself is not an extremist position if you think about it, given the fact that Britain did in fact illegally and wrongfully occupy India, and given that their justification for occupying India were extremely frivolous and not sanctioned by international law even today, right? Although I'm not arguing that international law is the standard of right and wrong, but I'm just saying that as lopsided as it is to Western colonialism, even then, the reasons specified by the British to take over India and to establish their dominion over India were wrong, and they were not legally justified. So, I'm not seeing an extremist position by Savarkar. He does seem to be somebody who's making sense so far, if you ask me. What do you guys have anything to say on what we've read so far? Or anyone in the comments, I'm happy to. During Direct Action Day killings, Mahatma was critical of Hindus, as Hindus retaliated after violence that went on for 3 days against them. Yeah, exactly. I've read those. I've read those articles. But like I said, I'm not a history buff. I know something about that incident, and I've read quite a few extracts like on Instagram and stuff, but again, I'm unsure of. I would actually rather base my opinions of Gandhi from this book, because I want to understand these events in a sequence. But yes, given the fact that the extracts I read were produced directly from a news article, that is again extremely incriminating for Gandhi. It's yikes. I don't know how such arguments were ever tolerated as acceptable in any stretch of imagination. Like how this country accepted that man as a freedom fighter is beyond me. No disrespect intended. It's just on the basis of what I'm seeing and what I'm reading. Alright, anybody else? Mahatma struck again. Stop it. Anything else? Anything that you guys would like to share on the group? Alright, okay. No? Okay. Alright guys, that's enough for today. I think we've read quite a good chunk of the book. We finished chapter 5, on to chapter 6. I'm so excited to start it. Do you guys think I should live stream this tomorrow as well? Would you guys be interested in joining? Let me know in the comments. And thank you so much for joining in today. I really appreciate your comments and your chats. I'm reading all of your messages, and yeah, hopefully we do this tomorrow as well. Although I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. You guys let me know, and if you want to continue reading with me, we'll schedule another live stream for tomorrow. No problem. Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, hold on. One of them. Who's raising their hand? Nagaraj, yes.
Yeah, so one interesting bit that Hridaynath Mangeshkar was actually, I think, fired from All India Radio or something like that.
Stop.
For
Really?
composing this, for composing a song based on this poem. So during the Congress rule. So I need to read more about it, but something like that happened. Yeah.
Hridaynath Mangeshkar was fired because he composed Savarkar's poem here.
Yeah. So this poem that we read, he composed it into a song, right? So
Yeah, and he was fired for that. That's
yeah.
horrible. God, that's disturbing. You're talking about Dinanath Mangeshkar, the father of Hridaynath. Oh, okay. I'll look that up actually on Google. Let me see. But if that's true, then that's terrible. The damage that certain regimes have done to this country is like insurmountable, and we're still only like peeling it layer by layer, trying to understand it. But it's still, every time you read more, you research more, you feel like you've uncovered a new layer. I might be missing the details, but I remember something like this happened. Okay, got it. Yeah, let's forward it on the group. Let's see. No? Let's read about it. Also, okay. Alright, guys. And also, I would like to know from everyone in the group and everyone who's joining us on the live stream, let me know what your recommendations for the next book should be. So, what should we read next? I'm open to suggestions. Whatever you suggest, I'm going to be vetting all of those books and seeing which ones are appropriate for the book club, and if they're good and if they're interesting and good for public consumption, happy to take it up. Alright? Okay, that's it for today's session, guys. We will see each other tomorrow, 9 o'clock, on Zoom for the members, and if possible, on YouTube for the people who've joined us on YouTube. Alright, bye everyone, good night. I'm gonna end the live stream here. Alright, bye guys, see you tomorrow.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye.